Hello guys and welcome to my new video. So today I decided to do a healing guide for Resto Unmaker, heroic and normal difficulty. So this is one of my first kind of serious video about the healing guide for heroic and normal, because there's a lot of people who ask me to make guides for not only the mythic healing guides, just for the heroic, for the people who are not going to step into mythic or just not feeling comfortable to do it. So I decided to do a guide for heroic covering a lot of the abilities. It's assuming that you know the basic abilities of the fight. I'm just going to be covering the abilities that is going to be affecting the healers, that is going to affect the damage patterns, the kind of cooldowns that you might be using, and how to actually optimize it. Of course, the timers when things happen, I'm going to be using from my own experience, from my own logs. So things like that will change because a lot of the timers are based on damage, and your raid might not have the same damage, so the abilities might happen a bit later. But I'm going to provide a generic information about when you should be using cooldowns and things like that for Resto Unmaker fight. And I'll be talking about from the perspective of like Restoration Druid, Holy Paladin, Resto Shaman, because these are the classes I'm most familiar with. But a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about does also apply to the priest. So let's start with phases. So first of all, Resto Unmaker has 4 phases. Resto Unmaker is actually a very simple healing fight. There's very few mechanics that healers that actually have to worry about. There's very few mechanics that basically make you move from one spot to another. You're just basically you're just going to stand with a raid stance and heal, and that's basically what you're going to be doing. You just need to know when the big damage is incoming, maybe tracking the right players who have the debuffs, placing HOTS or assigning cooldowns and things like that. So first of all, there's 4 phases. Phase 1, there's intermittent timed raid AoE damage, which basically allows for things like Restoration Druids and Priests to set out pre-HOTS and atonements and things like that, because it's timed. Phase 2 also has timed AoE damage because it is based on Soul Bomb. Phase 3 is Phase 3, if your raid does everything right, there's basically no damage except for some tank healing required. And phase 4 is basically where everything goes crazy and there is so much raid AoE that you want to save a lot of cooldowns for phase 4, because majority of your healing is going to be based, or where the raid can wipe is in phase 4, because there's so much damage incoming, there's so much healing that is needed, and there's a couple abilities that you need to keep track of. So in phase 1, there's an ability, intermittent timed ability called Tortured Rage, that does raid-wide AoE. That happens around every 10 seconds or so based on the logs that I've used. And phase 1 overall for us lasts around 2 minutes. So you kind of, as Restoration Druid, this priest, you can set out pre-HOTS, you can do things like atonements, you can do things like Cloudburst Totem, and you can build into the Cloudburst Totem and release it every time this Tortured Rage happens. Now you also have to account for the Cone of Death, which was cast around every 10 seconds, every 20 seconds. So Cone of Death is basically the ability when he faces a random raid member and cast this big shadow, and you have to move out of it. You have to basically step forward. So these are the 2 abilities that are going to be doing a lot of damage. You have to remember that there's also a debuff called Soul Blight, which is a debuff placed on a target. The target has to move out back of the raid, because that's going to place a death fog, a small death fog around them. So that debuff does some ticking damage. You might want to set up your grid or whatever healing frames you're using to show it. It's nothing lethal. It's nothing that's going to actually kill the raid member, but it is something to look out for, definitely. So like I said, the biggest issue is Tortured Rage, happens around every 10 seconds. I think we had something around, I want to say 5 or 6 casts of that. And then you have the Cone of Death, which is cast every 20 seconds. Now, the fun part is that, based on your raid DPS and things like that, those 2 abilities can't really overlap, or at least it didn't happen to us. But it did happen to us where Cone of Death was cast very close to Tortured Rage. So you had big raid AoE, and then the boss faced the raid member, and it was about to cast the Death Fog. So, and then the raid had to move out. So the problem with that is that you might want to use any cooldown that you have to account for the fact that there is raid AoE happening, and the people might be too slow to move out of the shadowy effect, and they might die. This is the only thing that can actually kill a raid member who's too slow to move out of it, because he or she might be 50% HP, and then they're too slow to move out, and then they take ticking damage from the shadows. from the death fog, and they basically can die. So you basically, if you see torture rage ability happening, you should have like pre-hots and things like that, and you see that 100%. So the boss casts Cone of Death when he reaches 100% energy. So if you have a weak aura that tracks the energy, you see Tortured Rage happen, you see Big Raid AoE happen, and you see the boss is at like 95% energy. You know he's going to cast, Argus is going to cast the Cone of Death. So you can actually pre-cast Trank, you can pre-cast things like Healing Tide, you can set up your Cloudburst Totem straight away, because you know this is the only time that people can actually die from this. And that's basically the whole fight. First of all, it's around 2 minutes. The amount of Cone of Deaths and the amount of Tortured Rages, we had like 5 or 6 or whatever. So you can actually use a raid cooldown for each one of those. Because for phase 2, you'll have them kind of there. You want to have 1 or 2 healers maybe keep their 3-minute cooldown or not use it at all in this phase. But it's not terrible to use like Trank for any of these, or to use another like Healing Tide and things like that in phase 1. It's almost... You should do it, but you should make sure that 1 or 2 healers have backups as well. You should use all your cooldowns throughout it. You should have things like your 1-minute cooldowns, 2-minute cooldowns like Wings, Ganir and things like that. So that it can work out pretty well. So because on phase 2 there is basically the only damage that happens is timed damage, and that is happening from Soul Burst and Soul Bomb. So if you did the boss already, you know that there is 3 members that are going to be marked. You should have that on your grid or healing frames, and you should pre-hot them, because they're going to be required to move out of the raid, and they're going to explode. So the person with Soul Bomb is going to explode. The tank has to protect him. When the Soul Burst explodes, it's going to be raid-wide damage. If you have a weak aura setup, this shows you basically when the person gets Soul Bomb and when the person is about to explode, there's going to be raid damage. And from what I've seen, we got 3 Soul Bombs happening in phase 2. 1 at 2 minutes 20, 1 at 3 minutes 20, and 1 at 4 minutes. So if you end up using your 3-minute cooldowns at the start of the fight, all of your healers become trigger happy and they use all of the cooldowns, you won't have anything for the first Soul Bomb. Now this raid AoE damage is not crazy if you do it properly. You can line up things like Balance. Balance is more than enough, or Essence of Ganir. You can line up smaller cooldowns, 1 or 2 minute cooldowns for this. If you do use all of the cooldowns, it's still fine. So if you use your Trank very early in the fight, you might have Trank available for the second Soul Bomb. If not, you most likely will have all of the raid cooldowns available for the third Soul Bomb, which happens around 4 minutes. Most healers should have something available for that. So like I said, it's all about pre-hotting, it's all about preparing atonements, Cloudburst Totems and things like that, because this damage is timed. And having a weak aura that shows you a remaining cooldown, a link in the description, there'll be a link to the weak aura that I'm using for Antorus, which you can see in the raid. It shows you raid damage incoming in 12, 13 seconds or whatever, and you can actually really prepare for this. So we now go into phase 3. So phase 3, if your raid does everything properly and interrupt specific adds that do Cosmic Beacon can be a raid-wide AoE. If your raid interrupts these adds, there's going to be no damage. People are going to stay around the middle so you can place your Efflorescences, Healing Rains, but there's just going to be intermittent damage. The tanks are the only ones that are actually going to be taking some significant damage. They're going to be needing some HOTS, some Beacon healings, and things like that. But if your raid doesn't interrupt Cosmic Beacon, there's going to be raid-wide AoE, and you might need to have a 3-minute cooldown or a strong cooldown for this. The problem here is that if you do end up using a 3-minute cooldown, in phase 4, it's where the real action happens. And in phase 4 you get the Soul Bomb ability. On top of that you also get the Tortured Rage as well. So you have multiple abilities happening at the same time which deal raid-wide AoE. So you might have to consider about saving a 3-minute cooldown in phase 3 and not using it, and using it in phase 4. But the thing is, if you actually... So we had, I think, Cosmic Beacon happening around 5 minutes. If you end up using a raid cooldown there, in phase 4... the biggest bulk of AoE damage happens is when the Soul Bomb goes off. And we had Soul Bomb go off at 7 minutes 30 and 9 minutes. So if you use in phase 3, if you use a cooldown, 3-minute cooldown, you might have it up for the second Soul Bomb. You might have it up. So it's not the end of the world to use a 3-minute cooldown in phase 3 if your raid is going down low. Just make sure not every healer is using everything. So in phase 4 is where the fun happens. the raid is resurrected and things like that. Keep in mind that your cooldowns are not reset. Unfortunately, your mana is reset though. So in phase 3, you should use all of your mana. You should use all of it, all of the stuff. A good point that I make out that at the start of phase 3, so at the end of phase 2, you're going to be Argus is going to be casting this animation where there's nothing going to be happening. I actually sometimes use Laythorn Potion if I feel that I won't have enough mana for phase 3. Because once phase 3 is over and the whole raid wipes and it's brought back to life, you get your second mana potion back. So you can use any mana potions in the first 3 phases, but once you're resurrected, you get to use another mana potion. So make sure that all of your mana is down in phase 3. Make sure that you use the healing potion or mana potion. And when phase 4 happens, you can use a mana potion again. So phase 4 is where everything happens. Like I said, there is raid-wide AoE from Tortured Rage. There is the bombs happening. So like I said, raid-wide AoE. The biggest AoE that's going to happen here is going to be the soul bomb. So the same kind of mechanic where what happened in phase 2, where the raid members have to go out and they have to explode. And most likely those raid members are going to die because there's the tank is not going to soak them. But the problem here is that for us it happened around 7 minutes 30 and around 9 minutes. So if you have all the cooldowns available in phase 4, you might be recommended to basically save your Ganniers or any of the 1 minute or 2 minute cooldowns or something shorter for the first soul bomb, which happens around 7:30. And then your second soul bomb is going to happen around 9 minutes. So you should first of all assign like 1 or 2 healers to use their healing cooldown for the first one, and then 1 or 2 healers to use the cooldown for the second soul bomb, because that's where the biggest raid AoE damage happens. There's continuous raid AoE, but that should be covered by just blanketing the raid, healing. Like you want to go hardcore. You want to go healing rain, you want to cast chain heals. You want to have efflorescence and things like that. Keep in mind, you have full mana. Now, from my personal experiences, I was able to basically spam from the start of phase 4 till the end of phase 4 and basically finish with 0 mana by using a mana potion as well. I basically was able to spam rejuvenations as a restoration shaman was able to spam healing rains, chain heals and things like that, and just go ham and use my cooldowns for those soul bombs. It happened twice to us. And like maybe saving a spirit link for those soul bombs can be really good to prevent people from dying and exhausting the tree, because the tree won't be able to resurrect you at a certain point. So like I said, soul bomb happened twice to us. Make sure to just basically go ham. Unless your DPS is really slow or really bad, you might run out of mana. But from my personal experience, I was able to just go really hardcore and not go out of mana in phase 4. It might be worth considering to go 3 if you do want to go with a Tree of Life, especially in Heroic. My personal experience as Restoration Druid is that if you are doing Heroic raids with a lot of raid healers or a lot of healers in general, let's say you have 5 healers for a 15-player group or something like that, it might be worth going with 3 because your cultivation is not going to do enough healing. As the Restoration Druid, I get this question a lot. If your cultivation is not healing for a lot, you should opt in to use the Tree of Life. And Tree of Life could be really good for phase 4. And besides that, there really isn't that much going on here. So there's only a couple abilities you need to keep track of. In phase 1, you have Tortured Rage, which is basically every 10 seconds you get raid-wide AoE, pre-hotting, Cloudburst Totem feeding into it and things like that is really good. Cone of Death, again, you just move away. That's the only thing that can actually kill people. Like I mentioned, raid-wide AoE and people being slow to move out of it. In phase 2, you have the Soul Burst and Soul Bombs, and the same thing happens in phase 4. First of all, having recourse to show you when it's happening is really good. In phase 3, like I said, if your raid does it properly, there's no damage whatsoever. Like I mentioned before, use all your mana by phase 3. That's when the ads spawn. That's when the ads spawn which take excessive vulnerability to specific spell schools, to like Shadow and things like that. And phase 4 is where all the fun happens. You probably want to have as many cooldowns available there. Like I said before, you can use the 3-minute cooldown in phase 3, but you have to be aware of the fact that you might not have enough cooldowns for the first soul bomb happening in phase 4. So hopefully this was a decent overview of a healing fight. This is actually a very easy healing fight in terms of healers don't actually have to move a lot. They don't really have to pay attention that much. There is a lot of timed AoE where pre-hotting is required, where atonement setup is required, where Cloudburst totem is required, and things like that. There's not a lot of tank damage happening. Holy Paladin can easily cover beacon healing without having to actually heal the tanks, without just concentrating on the raid. And this has been my overview of Argus the Unmaker heroic and normal fight. Let me know how you feel about this, because if there's enough demand, if there's enough people who want these kind of guides and interested in the heroic version, I will consider about making more of these. If there's enough demand, I'll consider about making a lot more of these, a lot of this more heroic normal content. So let me know in the comments, let me know if you want more of this. And thank you for watching this guide, and I'll see you next time.